I spent years studying quantum physics and neuroscience, and one big thing has been unmistakably clear. The biggest misunderstanding about consciousness is not that it exists, it is that we assume it lives inside our brain. Modern science is quietly moving towards a very different picture. One where the brain does not generate consciousness, but receives, filters, and renders it. In this video, I will show you why classical neuroscience struggles to explain memory and awareness, how modern physics points towards non-local information, and why quantum computing offers a powerful new model for how consciousness may actually work. By the end, you will see yourself not as a closed biological machine, but as an interface within a much larger field of awareness. So, let's start with something very simple that we almost never question. What is consciousness actually? Have you thought about it? Most people, when they think about consciousness, think about thinking, inner dialogue, intelligence, language, the voice in your head like commenting on everything. But those are functions of the mind, not the essence of consciousness itself. When I speak about consciousness here, I don't mean IQ, rationally, or how fast you can solve a math problem. I mean that there is something beyond you that makes you, the raw experience of being, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the taste of coffee, the simple sense of I am that is still there even when your thoughts momentarily go quiet. You can see this clearly with infants. A newborn cannot reason, cannot use language, cannot plan the future, right? But would you say that there is nothing that is like to be that baby? Of course not. It clearly experiences hunger, warmth, comfort, pain. There is sentience without complex cognition. The same is likely true for very simple organisms. They don't write philosophy, but they still respond to pain, to light, to touch. So something is being experienced even if there is no abstract self-story around it. So the first important point is this: consciousness does not require complex thinking. Thinking is one way consciousness expresses itself. It is not the source. Here's where the story gets very interesting and where classical neuroscience starts to struggle. For a long time, the dominant assumption has been very straightforward. Your memories and your awareness are stored locally in your brain. The brain was treated like a biological hard drive. Experiences go in, they get encoded in specific regions, and if you remove or damage those regions in your brain, the memory should disappear, right? The problem is that that's not what the data actually shows. One of my favorite examples is the work of Carl Lashley. For more than 30 years, he ran experiments trying to find the exact location of memory in your cortex, or in the cortex essentially, because he trained rats to run through a maze, then surgically remove different parts of the brain, fully expecting the memory of the maze to vanish when he hit the right spot in the brain and removed it. Now, it never did. No matter which area he removed, and he removed a lot, the rats still remembered how to run the maze. Amazing, right? Even when he removed a huge portion of the cortex, performance degraded gradually, of course, but it did not behave like deleting a file from a specific folder where the location was stored or the plan of the maze. There was no clean local erasure. They always remembered how to solve the maze. After decades of trying, Lashley had to admit defeat. He could not find any single place in the brain where memory was stored. That doesn't mean the brain is irrelevant, obviously, but it strongly suggests it does not function like a simple storage device. This is where another scientist called Carl Pribram came in with a very different proposal. Maybe the brain doesn't store information in little local packets at all. Maybe it behaves more like a holographic system, Crazy, right? But hear me out. In a hologram, information is not stored in one tiny point. It is distributed across the whole pattern. Sounds familiar, right? If you cut a holographic plate in half, you don't get half the image. You always get the entire image, just with less resolution. Damage reduces clarity, but it doesn't neatly erase one specific region. Pribram suggested that the brain could be working in a very similar way. Information, including memory, might be encoded in interference patterns and distributed activity rather than in one isolated physical spot. In that case, removing tissue wouldn't delete a specific memory. It would just make the overall image more blurry and messy. And here comes the key reinterpretation that I find so powerful. If the brain behaves more like a holographic decoder, then maybe, just maybe, it's not actually storing consciousness. Maybe it is decoding and translating something that exists in a more fundamental form. This is where physics suddenly starts telling a parallel story. For a long time, we operated under the assumption that reality is strictly local, that things only influence each other when they are in contact or very, very close by. But modern physics, especially quantum physics, has broken that idea wide open. We now know that quantum entanglement is real, very, very real. Two particles that interacted in the past can remain mysteriously connected, such that changing the state of one seems to instantly affect the other, even if they are light years away. That's not science fiction. That's been tested again and again and proven over and over again. On top of that, we have the holographic principle in modern theoretical physics, which suggests that the information that describes a region of space might actually be encoded on a lower dimensional boundary. In other words, what we experience as 3D reality could be a kind of projection of a deeper informational structure. The common thread here is that information does not always live in one single tiny place. It can be relational, distributed, and non-local. Space itself starts to look less like a static stage and more like an information structure. So when we look back at the brain through this lens, a new picture emerges. The brain doesn't look like a closed box generating reality out of nothing. It looks like a biological interface plugged into a much larger informational field. The psychologist and cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman takes this even further with his interface theory of perception. He argues that evolution does not select for organisms that see the truth. It selects for organisms that see what is useful for survival. And that makes sense, right? The result is that our perception is not a transparent window into reality. It's more like a desktop interface on your computer. Those little blue folder icons are not the actual circuits on the hard drive. They're simplified symbols that let you interact with something far more complex without being overwhelmed. In the same way, what you see, tables, chairs, bodies, even the way you perceive your own self, might be icons rendered by your brain. Not lies, but extremely efficient simplifications. In that case, neural activity is not consciousness itself. It is the rendering layer, the user interface of a much deeper field of awareness and information. Now, this idea becomes much more concrete when we look at the cutting edge of technology, quantum computing. Classical computers store information locally. A bit is either 0 or 1 in a specific physical location, the hard drive. If you damage the spot, the information is gone forever. Quantum computers, on the other hand, use qubits. A qubit can exist in a superposition of 0 and 1, and multiple qubits can be entangled with each other. In such systems, information is not simply here or there. It is encoded in the relationships between qubits across the entire system. Imagine that. And then there's a special approach called topological quantum computing. Here, information is not stored in a local property at all, but in the global topological state of the entire system. You can think of it like a pattern woven into wool fabric. Instead of ink on one pixel, This makes the information much more resilient to local disturbances, and that is what we need. So why am I telling you this? Because when I look at those architectures, it is very hard for me to still believe that consciousness is just little electrical spikes in one region of tissue. Our most advanced machines are already moving away from local point-based storage towards distributed, relational, field-like information processing. So here's my working hypothesis on this. Consciousness behaves much more like a non-local, field-level phenomenon, and the brain behaves more like a quantum-inspired interface that tunes into, shapes, and renders that field into your concrete experience. Does that make sense? Here's where meditation becomes incredibly practical. So when people go into deep meditative states, we consistently see certain patterns in the brain. Activity in the so-called default mode network, which is heavily involved in self-referential thinking and mind wandering and stuff like that, tends to decrease significantly. At the same time, there can be increases in coherence in specific frequency bands like theta and gamma. So what does that mean in human language? Subjectively, people report a reduced sense of separation, a feeling of expanded awareness, sometimes even experiences of being beyond the body, beyond time, beyond the usual sense of me, myself, and I. Objectively, their brain activity looks less like a noisy, self-obsessed narration and more like a harmonized, synchronized pattern. One interpretation that fits beautifully with everything we just discussed is this: meditation does not create more consciousness, it relaxes the filter. The interface becomes less noisy, less contracted, less obsessed with its own icons, and suddenly more of the underlying field can be experienced. In that sense, the real illusion is not consciousness, the real illusion is locality. The belief that who you are is confined to a 3-pound organ in your skull, we call the brain. From this perspective, humans are not closed systems trying to generate awareness. We function as interfaces within a larger field. The brain does not generate consciousness, it tunes into it, shapes it, and renders it into a personal and local experience. Consciousness is not something the brain accidentally produces. It is something the nervous system learns to interface with. When the way the system tunes changes, perception changes and experiences shift. This is why consciousness is not only a philosophical question, it is a practical one that shapes how reality is lived, here and now. Understanding this is the first breakthrough, and applying it is where real change begins. So, if you feel stuck or caught in repeating emotional patterns, the next step is learning how to use these insights in everyday life. That is exactly what my video, Watch This If You Feel Stuck in Life, is designed to help you with. It turns the science we explored here into simple shifts that help you break old loops and regain momentum. So watch it now.